Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend and Publish. Welcome to episode 78, Writing in the Car. At the time this episode is released, it will be time for a lot of summer travel for people that live in the Northern Hemisphere. And many of us are spending time in cars traveling for vacations, if we're able to do those, based on wherever we are in the pandemic and in your area of the world. But a lot of times we also have long commuting times for academic positions. So this might not just be a specific summer challenge. This might be something that's happening to you during the year regularly, particularly for those of us in two-body relationships. Sometimes one of the partners has to commute a long distance, so you spend a fair amount of time in the car. And then certainly for parents or caregivers in the crowd, a lot of us are spending time and logging in the lanes and school pickups and waiting in lines for students to come out of schools or picking up kids from practices and all kinds of activities. So, the sum of it is that many academics spend a lot of time in the car if you're a place that has a car. And so I wanted to do a special episode just about this particular challenge because I've tried to get a little bit creative about how I use some of that car time and commuting time to do academic work. And I wanted to throw out a couple of strategies about that. In addition, I will throw some links in the show notes about different types of commuting and different types of ways you might navigate this. So for example, people that are riding on trains to go into work, certainly that's a different way of commuting than if you have to drive a car yourself and be the person that's in charge of you actually getting from point A to point B. So let me throw a couple of strategies and tips out there. Some of these are compiled from two different stints where I had pretty long commutes. One was where I had about a 90-mile commute to do some postdoctoral research 4 times a week. And then there was another time where I was doing a visiting professor position, and I did have some overnight travel, but I tended to have around 2 hours round trip on either end. So sometimes I would end up doing, 4 hours of commuting on a single day if I went back and forth on the same day. And sometimes it would be in the span of like 2 or 3 days. In addition to those types of commutes, right now in my current scenario, every single day after school, I have about 48 minutes in the car where I'm not driving anymore, but I am just sitting and waiting. That's sort of my school pickup situation. And so I've got time where I'm sort of trapped in a car pickup line. I can't really go anywhere. I can't really do anything. I can't leave my car. I have to stay in the car. So I found some creative ways to use that. So let me throw out a couple of scenarios. One of which on the long commute, I know there's been some discussion on Medium and some of the other areas out there about using audio dictation to do some writing while you're driving. I have found that actually does not work very well for me. For one, I'm trying to concentrate on the road, so it's difficult for me to do audio dictation and stay in my line of argument, but also stay in my lane while I'm driving on the freeway. However, for those of you that can pull that off, I know in one of my episodes, one of our recent episodes, I titled it Why I Love InkPad. I'll link to it in the show notes. In that one, I do talk about using audio dictation on InkPad. And since that's an app that could be on your phone and works to capture writing, that might be a really useful one for audio dictation. Certainly another great one would be voice memos if you just want the audio recording, but I like the ones like InkPad that actually capture audio voice in writing. And that way you can download a note, an audio note into text that can be copied and pasted in Microsoft Word. So for those of you that are able to pull that off, certainly audio dictation is one of those things. But I try to think about other things you can do besides audio dictation, because for lots of reasons that might not be practical for some people. For example, like on the train, you might not be able to do audio dictation either. So here's some ways that I try to think about using commuting time when I'm driving. One of the things that I tend to do when I'm driving is sometimes I will write myself a little post-it before I start the car of what it is I want to think about on the drive. So it could be like a really brief brainstorming list of like a couple of items. It could be a stuck point on a project. For example, I was really debating about where to put a particular slice of content, if I was going to put it in the introduction to my book or in a later chapter in my book. So I wrote out that little slice of content. It was about 2 sentences. and put those two, the introduction and then a fourth chapter note underneath and question marks. And I just thought about that on a 2-hour commute I had to do recently. And in my mind, I just kind of imagined where it would go in the introduction or where it might go in chapter 4 and really thought about it. And I know I've mentioned a lot on this podcast about the importance of thinking time, but in this case, the 2 hours to really think through, why do I need it in this spot? Why don't I need it in this spot? Really allowed me to think through a practical solution, because this was a very important piece of information that had to be placed in probably the right spot to have it work. And just for the record, the solution I came up with was some spot that I would have never thought of if I was just trying to tangle with this at my desk. So the solution I ended up coming up with is like, it shouldn't go in the introduction or chapter 4. It actually belongs in chapter 2. And I had a good reason why. I would have never had the time to think through that particular writing challenge. So if I have a long commute, that is one thing that I will try to do, is just try to think about, all right, what's a writing problem I'm struggling with? Maybe I can take advantage of this time where, yes, I have to be paying attention to driving, but I might be able to think through this. And I find, especially with those of us that have, say you have kids in the car, and with my kids, they're probably listening to some music I don't want to listen to. I'm able to tune it out and really think about things I want to think about. So just using, kind of making that deliberate practice of thinking through a writing challenge, that is one way that's been very productive for me to use commuting time in that way. So another way that I might use it, and this is one you've probably heard before, I do listen to academic podcasts. I'll put a couple of my favorite ones in the show notes. There's some good ones that are out there. And what I'll try to do is find a couple of episodes that deal with a problem that I'm having at the moment. So like if I'm working on something in a literature review, I might pull a couple of episodes about that, stack them up so they're all ready to play. I listen to Apple Podcasts. I'm able to kind of order those, and then I'll just play them in a string. So even though I'm not actually writing, I feel like I'm doing some work on that writing, or at least, getting the information how to solve a particular writing problem. So that's something that I think is useful. Certainly you could be listening to Defend and Publish as your podcast on your commute. You could probably, if you're doing a 2-hour commute, you could probably get through like 25 episodes or something like that, because our episodes are not very long. But yes, so that would be an option, certainly. And, you found this podcast, so this one won't be in the show notes, but I'll put some other ones that I also listen to. So those are certainly 2 ways you can do it. We mentioned the audio dictation. That's another thing that you can do. Another thing that I like to do in a commute, this works better if you're alone, but I have also rehearsed conference presentations in the car. So, if I know what my slides are roughly, I know about the order, I will sometimes talk through a presentation without seeing my slides, just kind of going on memory, because again, I'm watching the road. I will do some rehearsal of those sorts of things. So that's something that has been very workable for me. Sometimes I'll do audio capture of it and see if there's anything I said in those notes that might be really useful when I'm doing a presentation live. That's a way to use it. Another thing that I sometimes do is if there's a sentence that's particularly problematic. I mentioned I like to think through a writing challenge. Sometimes I'll use commuting time to just say that sentence out loud a couple of different ways and see if I like any of the options better. And for that, a lot of times I will turn on voice memo and just listen to how it sounds. But all of those things I think are useful to do while you're actually driving. And certainly like if you're commuting on a train, you're limited in how much, you can be shouting into a microphone on your phone, but that might be one to think about. And then I also want to turn to then in the remaining time in this episode to talk about what happens when your car is parked, you're kind of trapped, you're stuck in your car. What kind of writing can you do? In my, 48 minutes every single weekday that I have to use while I'm waiting to pick up a kid from school, I've done this a couple ways, because I really, this 48 minutes was starting to get to me, because I felt like, oh, this is a waste of time. What could I be doing with it? And so I have not gotten into a rhythm or a plan, like every Monday in the car, I do this, every Tuesday, I do this. But these are some of the things that I've done at alternating points, and I've gotten some success with getting some writing finished. So, one of the things I have done is made sure my laptop is charged up. It's all ready for me to continue writing wherever I was in my writing session. So sometimes I'm writing right before a school pickup. So I, will save everything where it is, close my laptop, make sure it's nice and charged, drive to the school, park, get in the carpool line, park, and then open my laptop up and just keep going, like pretending I never even left the library or my office. So that's something that I will do. Other times, I won't actually type on a laptop because a lot of times that is not practical with your steering wheel. It's definitely not comfortable. My back aches after doing that. It's just not a practical thing to do. But a lot of times that parked time in the car is great for looking at printouts of writing. So sometimes I'll print out, 10 pages of an article or a chapter where I just want to do that copy editing work that sometimes is better when it's printed out and I can actually see what I'm looking at. I found car time is really useful for that. That's probably my preferred mode in that moment. Other things that I will do is I will purposely schedule writing phone calls during that 48 minutes. So I can talk with a collaborator on the phone in kind of a contained space where I'm not doing anything else. I can still take notes. I'm in a quiet car. I've gotten a lot of work done in that way. I've also done Zooms in that same way, working with collaborators because I can prop my phone up on my steering wheel, take notes, and it's almost like I'm in my office. So that's another way that I can do it. I also use the strategy of writing and reading. I know I've mentioned this. I'll put a link in the show notes to this episode about reading practices and you getting some writing done while reading. But one of the ways that I like to write, or I like to make sure that I capture information from articles I read, is I like to write about them right in the margins of the article. So of course, this only works if I have, a printout or a scholarly journal, but I still get 2 or 3 scholarly journals. And sometimes I'll just throw those in the car with me in a pen and a highlighter. I'll just read some articles and see if there's any connections to my work. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, but that's okay because it does broaden what I'm thinking about at any given moment with scholarship. So hopefully some of these strategies are helpful if you're spending a lot of time in the car. A few other ones on trains that have been mentioned. I'll put a few links in the show notes that are specifically helpful, but one of which is that if you do any kind of recording of yourself, let's say you're reading a chapter aloud or reading a couple of pages aloud and you have a voice memo file, sometimes that's helpful to just listen to while you're on the commute. So this would be helpful, certainly if you're in the car, you could do this, but also you could do this on a train and just listen to how the wording sounds. Another thing that would be useful for either the car or a train or a plane, if you're flying somewhere or something like that. I know I did a research project where I was listening to interviews, audio recordings of interviews. And so one of the ways I got to know these interviews a lot better was just to have all those audio files stacked up where I could play them through and listen to them. I wasn't trying to do anything with them. I was just trying to familiarize myself with what kinds of themes are appearing in these interviews that I hadn't thought through before. So that meant, some of these interviews I listened to several times, but in my mind, it really was not a waste of time. I only had 15 of them and they were about an hour each. So they were long, but it wasn't totally out of the realm to kind of remember them all independently. And I know I did find some themes that I didn't know about before. And a lot of those themes show up in my 2018 book, How Writing Faculty Write. That's how I ended up discovering some of those themes, was just listening to the audio recap of these interviews. So hopefully these tips help, and happy writing this week.